2 steps on the water. But that isn't true. There was a finality in the Yo-Folk's voice that made the implied accusation in her broad accented words all the more upsetting to Zahario. Taking a moment, he reached deep into a place of stillness that was his pride and drank deep, calming himself just as he had at Maragladia. He recalled the sight of all which Nemoria had arrayed against his people, all they had laid on his path to freedom. Seemingly unconcerned with his contemplation, Dana heaved another forkful of grass from the cart onto the heap below with a casual flick of her wrists. The silence stretched between them. "How is it?" Zahario began, wetting his lips as he sought the words for Kion vi Selas. Giving up, he tried a different approach. "In what way?" "Well," Dana huffed, as another tangle of grass was sent tumbling down to the ground. One of the heifers at the growing pile lowed, and Dana considered it briefly. "I've never heard of such a paragon. Neither at the academy nor from the troubadours. Seems like such a tale would make a fair song." Zahario relaxed slightly. Dana didn't think him a liar, she just didn't believe him, but she at least was not diminishing all he had said. He frowned, sending sweat down his old scar and into his eye. As he mopped the stinging salt from his face with the hem of his old tattered tunic, he didn't notice the approach of Alice. The foreman returned his squinting, reddened gaze with a dour look that reminded him she did not find Zahario's oddities as endearing as Dana. "No time for dithering. There's 2 more wagons and 2 more fields before sundown," Alice remarked, keeping her suspicious gaze on Zahario as he skewered as large a bushel of cattle feed as he could and sent it into the crowd of bovine onlookers. "Zach was just telling me a story," Dana drawled, planting her pitchfork tines and cocking her head at Zahario. "Another tale about Rashield riding a wolf, was it?" Alice snorted, eyes roving disinterestedly across the other Yo-Folk, laying out feed across the rocky, unyielding field. "It was a lion," Zahario corrected, with a smile strained by what he hoped to be best attributed to his toil. "Could have been a pig for all I care. I never heard such foolish fancy," Alice shot back, grunting to help Dana dislodge a particularly reluctant heap of grass. "This time it was about someone who couldn't lie, and when they were to be killed for it, they vanished. Like Zemrus." Dana's eyes danced as she recounted the tale. Zahario couldn't tell if her lightheartedness was earnest or intended to agitate the curmudgeonly foreman. "Sounds like our foreigner friend should learn the sort of stories we like here in Dawn." Alice's eyes narrowed just a fraction as she uttered the word foreigner. He could weather this, Zahario told himself, as he had weathered war, as he had weathered being chained. If he wants to be a real yeoman of Dawn, he should stick to the real paragons, and not dither. With that, Alice departed, seeking out others that weren't properly earning their prosperity. The well within him was dry. Zahario turned his face away from Dana and the pondering, placid attention of the cows. To give up what had kept him free during a lifetime in chains in exchange for a place to call home? Was that really freedom, or imprisonment of another kind? Bottling the thought away, he reassembled himself and continued working in silence. "Oi, wonder what's got on under her cap here, Zach?" Dana chimed, looking at him vaguely concerned. The first expression of anything except bemusement she'd afforded him since they had met. There was a long pause of grass being heaved and scattered. "I figure you should keep telling your stories. The world always needs more." She paused, squinting along the line of others labouring. "Plus, it sure helps make field work more tolerable." Zahario smiled. It was an earnest smile, even if he felt bruised inside. Returning to work, he thought for a while, and then began. "A long time ago, Wise Taylor was born in the House of Chains." Overview. 2 groups of Asavian refugees seek to establish new lives in the Empire. The Free Folk are former slaves whose peculiar approach to the Way raises eyebrows among more conservative priests. The Maracosans are defeated Asavian rebels who want to establish their own enclave in the Brass Coast. Since the evacuation of Aracosa during the short-lived Asavian Civil War, there have been 2 groups of refugees in the Empire. The first group, who call themselves the Free Folk, now dwell in Astalat as guests of the House of the Proffered Hand. Invited to live among the Yo-Folk in Dawn, they seem to be hard-working, driven people, keen to build new lives for themselves. Unfortunately, the spiritual beliefs that play a large part in their lives have attracted criticism from some priests, leading to a growing sense of unease among the former Asavian slaves. On the other side of the Empire, in Madruga, the other large group of Asavian refugees, the Maracosans, are much less interested in integrating. They show no signs of wishing to become imperial citizens and seem content to live on the Brass Coast as foreigners, at least for the moment. Their leader, Leonarda Russo, is keen to see her people rebuild their lives on foreign shores, but is looking for reassurance and recognition from Imperial Senate. In return, They are prepared to share some of the fruits of their artisanship with the Empire. Strangers in a strange land. The free folk mostly live in Dawn, but regularly travel the Empire seeking work and a chance to learn more about the Empire. The free folk are a population of foreigners evacuated from Maricosa after its failed uprising against the Asavian hegemony. Unlike the Maricosans, they are former slaves freed during the uprising when the rebels needed additional troops. They have no loyalty to Asavia itself, unsurprisingly, and leapt at the invitation to leave Treasure Does and come to Kier Falcon. While they have begun to build homes in Astolat, members of the folk may be encountered anywhere in the Empire, travelling via roads and trods alike. They are often looking for work, keen to learn more about their new home. They are also keen to visit places of pilgrimage, to learn more about virtuous paragons and exemplars, or to celebrate places connected with these inspirations they have previously only heard stories of. Virtue seems to be a cornerstone of free folk life. They proudly claim that their faith made them free, even when they were forced to toil for their Asavian masters. This past season, there have been quite a few free folk visiting the marches, primarily Upwald and Mitwald. They are no strangers to working in fields and orchards, or in the care of animals, or in any kind of outdoor labour required to dig ditches, flatten roads, maintain walls and hedgerows, or to build in wood and stone. They work hard, and they expect to be paid a fair wage in keeping with their understanding of prosperity. But they are also keen to celebrate their day's work is done, swapping stories of Asavia and the rebellion, of their experiences in the Empire, and their peculiar religion, of course. Participation. Characters with a business, farm, mine, forest, or herb garden personal resource are free to roleplay that they have interacted with or employed some of the free folk, especially in the marches. Their Imperial is generally quite good, and they are scrupulously respectful, polite, and honest in their dealings with Imperial citizens. Their character is marked by a strong work ethic, balanced by apparently genuine joy at the freedoms they experience and the marvels they see as they travel the Empire. Many are very interested in the Imperial nations. They know the most about Dawn and the Brass Coast, but are excited to learn about the other Imperial nations. They seem committed to building new lives in the Empire, and most seem to assume that they will eventually become Imperial citizens. They speak freely about their faith with anyone who expresses an interest, and they are always happy to hear stories of Imperial paragons, exemplars, heroes, and champions they are unfamiliar with. Another way. The free folk believe that they follow the way, but many of their practices are quite different to those of Orthodox Imperials. Some conservative priests are concerned about the way the free folk practice their religion. But all is not well. The free folk carry with them an unorthodox interpretation of the way that some priests see as flagrantly heretical. The free folk are very keen to visit places of pilgrimage that have statues and images of paragons and exemplars. They are absolutely enamoured by the chapel known as La Roque Cathedral and its beautiful sculptures of Caul, Permian, Gilda Ashwine, and Ignatan, for example, and it genuinely seems that every free folk able to travel north to the shores of the Semilac has visited over the last 6 months. At the same time, there is marked confusion when they discover the House of Barbs in Herkinia, and mistake the statues for images of hitherto unknown exemplars. This enthusiasm for artistic representations of inspirations is not a problem by itself. Concerns come from the fact that the freeborn seem to worship these images. This is particularly true when dealing with images of the beings they class as le diokoj, the divines. While they claim that this is their word for what the Empire knows as a paragon, there is serious concern that it might be better translated as God. The language barrier does not help. While the free folk are learning Imperial quickly, their own dialect is a mixture of common Asavian and a more obscure tongue that seems unique to themselves. The folk leave offerings and perform celebrations around statues, tombs, and relics, purported to be associated with Imperial paragons in order to reaffirm a personal connection with the paragons themselves, who they believe to exist beyond the labyrinth, within a divine family. Counted amongst this family are some names familiar to Imperial believers, such as Rishield, but they are also a slew of characters the Imperial Synod has never heard of, such as Truthful Alexio or Tajlora the Wise. Despite attempts at proselytizing and lecturing by those sympathetic to their history, the folk have refused to renounce their paragons, nor the manner in which they practice their faith. Many have turned inward, the ebullient passion for which they have previously expressed being replaced by a sombre determination to live their truth and follow the virtues in their own way. Believers or blasphemers. Troubadours and other faithful around Astolat, where many free folk can be found, seek clarity on how these outsiders should be treated. There is concern that the spiritual danger that these travellers pose to those they meet on the roads. Though welcomed into Dawn by a statement of principle, there is a question of what is to be done if the free folk continue to cling to their beliefs. Critics of the free folk state that their practice are nothing less than idolatry. They believe that the divine family are simply Asavian gods in disguise. false idols that subvert their destiny. Although some of these divines are clearly adopted or reinterpreted paragons familiar to the synod, others are entirely foreign and possibly not real. In this view, the folk are clearly blasphemers, teaching and promoting false paragons. Those folk with a stronger grasp on imperials strenuously disagree. They argue that the Way recognizes the paragons personify both virtue and what it means to be human, and that the crime of idolatry involves subsuming human will to or venerating inhuman forces. How, they ask, can it be wrong to venerate a by definition human force? They appear unwilling to accept that the synod should have control over the people that others recognize as paragons, a view that has proved of particular interest to adherents of the universalist and foundationalist schools of thought. Their veneration is virtuous, they argue. Don't the highborn build statues of the paragons? Don't priests of all nations look to emblems and symbols to inspire them? There is fractious debate over how the exemplars and paragons of foreign nations such as Sumar or national figures like Bolstering Bill, who are not immediately recognised by the synod, should be treated. If these paragons were to be investigated, what should the folk be expected to do in the meantime? And what about the General Assembly declaration, barely a year ago, that it is acceptable to call for any virtuous human to be recognised as a paragon? And what of the other judgments passed by the synod recognising and asking for tolerance and respect towards belief of the Empire's constituent nations? Should such tolerance be extended to the beliefs of foreigners who claim to follow the Way? Those who are arguing that the folk beliefs are heretical, a perversion of the doctrines, point to the doctrines themselves for support. They say that if the synod does not act to put down this heresy, they will be breaking the doctrine of the paragons, because the free folk are openly proclaiming strange paragons with neither acceptable signs nor recognition, and freely speaking about them to imperial citizens as if these things do not matter. They are mangling the doctrine of the labyrinth to tell fairy stories of some magical land of spirits where the faithful wait for their loved ones, a claim resonant of the Yalian schism. What is to be done? There is an opportunity to either suppress or embrace the free folk's worship through a statement of principle. Any National Assembly can pass a statement of principle expressing a perspective on the free folk's beliefs to direct their citizens on how they should be dealt with. The free folk are not going to abandon their faith simply because a handful of priests tell them to do so. Their belief in the divines gave them strength in the centuries they were enslaved by the Asavians and continue to help them build a strong community now that they are free. At the moment, it is mostly traditionalist and orthodox priests who are concerned about the free folk. It seems the Yo folk among whom they live are broadly unconcerned about their particular beliefs, seeing them as a little weird rather than threatening. For some, their veneration of the paragons is only a more extreme example of the way some Yo folk look upon the glorious and romantic champions in the troubadours' tales, a comparison that does little to quell concern among the free folk critics. The conservative priests may not be wrong in their belief that trouble is brewing. Now that they are in the Empire, several free folk have been able to study Liao ceremonies that imperial priests take for granted. They are using some of the money they earn doing labouring to purchase Liao so they can create their own hallowed items and consecrated spaces. If they pursue their ambition of becoming imperial citizens, they are certainly going to build congregations where they can preach their particular beliefs about the paragons. Their enthusiasm for the divines is infectious. The exuberant joy they take in sharing stories of their cultural heroes and speaking of their beliefs about the labyrinth can be very compelling. Amidst all this confusion, there have been calls for the Imperial Synod to take action before the situation deteriorates to the point where Caer Falcon becomes another Whittle. There are no mandates at this time. Rather, the priests concerned about the free folk, and the free folk themselves, have asked the Imperial Synod to make suitable statements of principle to offer guidance. The most appropriate assemblies in which to raise such statements are the Assembly of the Nine, the General Assembly, and, currently, the Dornish National Assembly, given that is where the free folk are living. Other assemblies may wish to weigh in as well, although it is very unlikely that statements in the virtue assemblies will have much effect unless they are united in their opinions. Any such achievements that achieve a greater majority will eventually be shared with the free folk by their friends. There is no possibility that the statement of principle by itself will convince them to give up their deeply held beliefs, but it will contribute to the growing impression that they are not welcome in the Empire. Whatever else happens, the outcome is very unlikely to be violence. The free folk are much more likely to seek homes elsewhere if the Synod makes it clear there is no place for them in the Empire. Celebration. The free folk are again planning to visit Anvil on Saturday. As with previous seasons, the free folk will again be arriving at Anvil during the summer solstice. They intend once again to perform their celebration of the Sun Queen. These odd festivities were first witnessed by imperial citizens last year and involved burning an effigy of the paragon and placing it on the imperial throne for veneration. Among their numbers this time, however, will be a few of those who have received instruction in Liao ceremonies, and who fulfill a function similar to that of imperial priests within their own community. This presents an opportunity for synod priests interested in their beliefs to have a proper conversation with their spiritual leaders of the free folk. They are expected to arrive on Saturday morning at some time. It is not clear exactly when, but it is likely at least some of them will be actively seeking out priests to try and get to the bottom of whether there is a place for them in the Empire or not. They have also expressed a strong interest in getting to know people of the Marches a little better. They're planning to visit Anvil Camp and share some of their traditional delicacies with the distant cousins of our distant cousins, as they apparently characterise the Marches. They're expected to arrive at the Marches camp sometime after noon on Saturday. Ruins on a distant shore. The Maracoses have established their own settlement at Trajados. They are seeking Senate recognition of their right to the land. The free folk were not the only foreigners delivered upon the shores of the Brass Coast after the failed uprising. The upper classes of Asavian society, the slave-owning, plenum-associated refugees, form a small majority of those refugees currently living in the Empire. Bringing as much of their wealth with them as they could carry, they were told in no uncertain terms that they are to no longer rely upon slaves for prosperity. These exiles have settled the abandoned freeborn settlement of Trajados in North Madruga. Here they have rebuilt, spreading their salvaged wealth carefully with the freeborn to construct small estates, recapture the overgrown farms from the weeds that overrun them, and establish a few workshops for the use of their artisans. They are just about able to support themselves and can afford to pay a reasonable wage to the freeborn labourers who work for their new farms. Most of their former slaves have left Trajados to begin new lives as free folk guests of the House of the Prophet Hand. Others have quit Trajados to embrace the freeborn way of life with the aid of House of Guerra and the support of dust, flame and glass. The few who have stayed behind were once more privileged slaves, tutors, housekeepers, factotums and aides. They continue in their former roles, but now as free citizens. The Maracosans, never Nemorians and rarely accepting Asavian, are a disparate group, made up of priests and soldiers, crafters and traders, who have spent the last 9 months coming to terms with their new circumstances. Some have adapted better than others, of course. The old nobles apparently spend much of their time bemoaning their lost lives of privilege and influence, while the younger generation have shown pragmatic streak, taking up lives as traders or as translators, mercenaries and teachers for their freeborn neighbours. One area they apparently excel in is the crafting of magical talismans of various sorts, including several unknown to the imperial citizens. In particular, they are very proud of the tools they make explicitly for the use of artisans. Once upon a time, even the Nemorians respected the quality of our tools, before they started to take us for granted, of course, and assumed we should always give our skill out of patriotism, as one of the traders explains. Their abilities apparently go far beyond things such as lodestone shears, but they require large amounts of material to create, and so, until they have established themselves, their ability to craft them has been limited. Though they have built no temples, shrines, or edifices to their gods, the exiles still follow their particular version of the Asavian faith. There are a small number of priests among them who, while discreet, do not attempt to conceal the fact they lead religious services venerating their gods. When they first arrived in Madruga, they requested permission to build a temple dedicated to the 3 gods of Maracos, permission that was not forthcoming. They have not repeated their request, instead having converted an old parador near the centre of Trajados to a place of worship. Outsiders are not invited to their ceremonies, and they have scrupulously avoided proselytizing or spread of their faith to imperial citizens. They are well aware that their beliefs are at odds with the orthodoxy of the synod, but they also have no interest in abandoning their faith and the connection to their past it provides them. Participation. Any freeborn character is free to roleplay that they have interacted with the Maracosans. Those who deal with the people of the Brass Coast, generally younger or more free-thinking individuals, are working hard to master Imperial and are occasionally seen at markets and paradors across Madruga. They are notable by their dress. They still favour the long tunics and loose robes they wore when they still lived in Asavia. At first, it is common for them to wear white tunics or robes, but as they have settled in Trajados, they have come to understand the negative connotations related to that colour, and are now much more likely to wear clothes of the brighter hues common on the Brass Coast. One element that causes a little conflict is that they are used to dealing with the corrupt economy based on graft and bribery. They often try to offer inducements to gain special privilege, but expect such dealings to be underhand and discreet. As can be imagined, this is very much at odds with the traditional freeborn embrace of brazen honesty, especially in business dealings. As mentioned above, they refuse to talk about their religion with outsiders, and they are not interested in the way. Earning the way. Desiring stability and a formalization of their relationship with the Senate, The Maracosans request that treasure does be ceded to them. In return for privacy and freedom to maintain their religion, they will share some unique items with the Empire. A Maracosan legate will visit Anvil on Friday around 10 PM to speak with the ambassador to a saviour. Now that the exiles have settled in, they have expressed a great deal of interest in ensuring that their homes will not be taken away from them again. While a few have chosen to become citizens of the Brest Coast or the League, the majority wish to remain Maracosans. Indeed, the uprising in the Saviour was all about their desire to reclaim their identity separate from that of the Nemorians. Their most fervent wish appears to be left alone to practice their own customs without interference from the Empire. They're quick to point out that they are not talking about slavery. They are well aware of the realities of the situation here, and anyway, they don't have any slaves anymore. What they want is the religious and cultural freedom to govern themselves in a traditional way. Leonardo Russo, the priest of the god Visayas, is doing most of the work liaising with the Empire, thanks in part to her fluent grasp of the imperial tongue. The Emigare community wishes to claim the abandoned town of Tragedaz from the Empire so that they may feel comfortable in their new home. Essentially, they are requesting that the Senate cede the town of Tragedaz and its environs to them. They are already living in the town, working the fields and operating businesses. From their point of view, it is a mere formality, but the Senate may well have different opinions. During the spring equinox, a legate, a former general, Glaucia Herminia, made the journey to Anvil to explore the purchase of the Madrugan town. The proposal is that in return for ceding Tragedaz, they will provide the Empire with access to the goods produced by their adept artisans. This would create an imperial title, the Maracosa Sendito, who would represent the Empire to the Maracosans and vice versa. In return, they would gain access to a ministry, allowing them to purchase some of the magic items the Emigare artisans can create, some of which are unknown to the Empire. Creating this title would not incur any cost to the Senate and would not require any kind of commission. It is a purely diplomatic matter. It would, obviously, require a Senate motion to cede the town of Tragedaz, however, and to determine how the Maracosa Sendito would be appointed. The Maracos themselves seem broadly unconcerned whether it's a national position, appointed by the freeborn, or an imperial position, available to any citizen. But they have insisted that it be appointed via the imperial bourse, to ensure that it is held by someone whose first concern is trade rather than religion or politics. Legate Hermina intends to visit Anvil during the summer solstice with some examples of the things the Maracosan crafters can make, so that representatives of the Empire can choose which ones they are interested in buying. Exactly which items the Maracosa Sendito can purchase would be a matter for negotiation. The more concessions the Senate is prepared to make, the more options the ministry would provide. The legate is expected to arrive around 7 PM on Friday during the summit, and hopes to speak with the ambassador to a saviour. The title is due to be re-elected at the summer solstice, but the civil service are keen to point out that the incumbent, Pact of the Imperial Orcs, will remain in the title until it is reappointed or at the end of the summit. Game information. It is not possible to create a character who is one of the free folk or the Maracosan emigres. Further reading. On the outside, looking inside. Spring 383 YE, Wind of Fortune talking about recent events with the refugees. All at Sea, Winter 383 YE, Wind of Fortune detailing relations between the refugees and the Empire. Large but far away, Autumn 383 YE, Wind of Fortune detailing the arrival of the Maracosans and the Free Folk. Through My Sails, Summer 383 YE, Wind of Fortune introducing the opportunity to evacuate Aracosa.